Everybody. That's about 3 times as much government. And so the big bunch, they put this flour in there. They like to have that flour.
Good morning. How you gentlemen doing? All right. It's a Tuesday morning. I'd rather be in bed. Oh, do you? Nice. What do y'all? So it's like a mock trial for family law? Divorce and custody. Sweet. Can't you just get them to agree? Yeah. Nice. I've got to do an LP judging this afternoon. I don't remember doing that in LP. Did we? Did we do like a? I didn't think so. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I think that would have been fun to do. Yeah, good. I hate when the chief calls me at the worst possible time. Morning. Hello. Oh, you're special. You get a little placard.
Yeah, I am.
Jeez.
That's what happens when you're second thought.
Double, I think you're here.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm making my own placard. No, I've actually got a perfect spot for my live stream. So. Mr. Brandon, how are you today?
Doing fine, you know?
I almost said Mr. Vice President, but you've been relieved of such duties.
I mean, we still don't have a new one, so.
True, true. Did he say in that email that we're doing a
I believe he is simply confused.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. It should be criminal procedure, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. When are you having to be out of
Okay, this was supposed to be Appalachian on Tap. Where are the kegs?
There was a requisition from.
Okay.
I'd do it with him a few months before.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Appalachian On Tap is delighted to have the privilege of welcoming U.S. Senator Tim Kaine to ASL to speak with us. Senator Kaine is a former member of the Richmond City Council, former mayor of Richmond, former lieutenant governor, and former vice presidential nominee. Senator Kaine is presently a member of the Armed Services Committee, the Budget Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Foreign Relations Committee and the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He was also a civil rights lawyer for 17 years. Back in 1998, to have him here today. Please give him another round of applause. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everyone.
Morning.
It's so good to be here. I want to thank Dale. Dale didn't mention I've known him since he was born. He is a neighbor of mine. His father is one of my best buddies and also tried a lot of cases together, including our big case against Nationwide. And I've really been looking forward to coming to Appalachian to talk to you all. I had it on my calendar in the spring of 2020. Then COVID hit and that got scrapped. But Dean Faulkner, thank you for the opportunity to come back and talk to you. There's so much that that I'm just kind of bubbling over. I'd love to talk to you about Senate business, a new Supreme Court justice, Ukraine. But what I thought I would do is save that for the Q&A. I want to take questions. And I want to take questions about everything, but instead, what I want to talk to you about is being a lawyer and the profession that you're embarking on here at Appalachian and in chapters to come. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk to you about 4 things. That a JD degree will open up so many paths for you in your future. I want to tell you the best thing about being a lawyer I want to tell you things I learned by being a trial lawyer for 18 years. And finally, a couple of things that being a lawyer have really helped me at in my now nearly 30 years in elected office. So those are the 4 things I want to do, but then Q&A about everything. Let me do a couple of introductions. I have some great staff with me. Laura Blevins is a staffer of mine who works in my Southwest Virginia office in Abingdon, but she covers the great Southwest and does a superb job. Right behind Laura is Gentry Aiken, who's my executive assistant, and then Janine right here is my press secretary. So Janine is with me, and we're doing a bunch of events in Appalachia this week. The JD opens up so many paths. When I was in my first year at law school, I created a group of friends that are still like my best friends in life. There's 7 of us. I am the only one who even practiced law for 1 day. My 6 other colleagues were university professors and entrepreneurs, and nonprofit CEOs. They all found their law training incredibly helpful for whatever they did. I met a guy in my first year in law school named Mark Warner. We've known each other since the spring of 1980, 42 years. I've been his, like the Ed McMahon who was Johnny Carson. Most of you are too young for that. I've been his second in command as his lieutenant governor and now the junior senator of Virginia. Mark never practiced law for a day, entrepreneur. I have used my law degree to be a private civil litigator, a law professor at the University of Richmond, and then a public servant with a local government chapter and a state government chapter and a federal chapter now. My wife has used her law degree to be a legal aid lawyer and a stay-at-home mom and a juvenile court judge and the First Lady of Virginia reforming our foster care system, and then working at our community college system, and then the interim president at George Mason University. So you get the point that I'm making. A JD degree, I suspect most of you will not be like my friends and never practice law for a day, but the JD degree, the breadth that it gives you, the analytical skills that it gives you, the contacts that you make will outfit you for success in so many different paths in life. So sometimes you'll have a hard time choosing. There may be different paths open to you, but I just want to affirm that now, 40 years nearly after I graduated from law school, I'm so glad that I got the JD degree. And my friends who never practiced law for a day would say the same thing. Second thing, best thing about being a lawyer. This is going to sound like a complete cliche, but it's true. You get to help people. You get to help people. Now, of course, there's a million ways you can help people. When I tell you about the law practice that I had and share lessons that I learned from that, you'll get, okay, you were a trial lawyer, you help people in trials, but I'm talking about much more than that. Much more than that. Lawyers often do wills, and the lawyers who do wills will often do hundreds or thousands of them. But for each person that you're doing a will for, they're only doing one. You may update it, but they're only doing one. And I know from having a will and having worked on a lawyer with it, like, this is a big deal. Lawyers do living wills, helping people decide, okay, can I make a decision in advance about if my health declines, what measures should be taken to keep me alive? Now, the lawyers who do those do lots of them, but for most of us, we only do one. Lawyers that do real estate transactions, buying, selling a home, I mean, it's like the biggest investment anybody ever makes in their life. You might do thousands of them, but for most people, it happens fewer than 5 times in their life. Or lawyers who help establish businesses. You may incorporate hundreds of businesses, but for an awful lot of people, deciding to sink life savings into starting their own business rather than be somebody else's employee is such an anxiety-producing event in their life, with both optimism and excitement, but also fear about what if it goes wrong. At all these steps along the way, or in the more maybe traditional pro bono things like helping a nonprofit get established, you have the opportunity every day to enter into the life of someone who really needs you, needs great advice, and make a huge difference in their life. And that part, to me, I practiced law for 18 years before I set law practice aside when I got to be lieutenant governor. It wasn't, every day that I felt like I'm really helping someone out today. Sometimes it was the drudgery of discovery motions or whatever. But many days, I really had the feeling like I am really helping lighten somebody's burden and help them out. And that feeling is the best part of being a lawyer. And no matter what kind of law you practice, you'll have that opportunity over and over and over again if you don't get jaded about it. Again, sometimes in repetition, we forget how important things are to the individual client before us. But having that opportunity is a remarkable part of practicing law. What did I learn from practicing law? I'm not going to tell you what I learned about law from practicing law. I'm going to tell you what I learned about life. And this alone would take me 2 hours. So I'm going to tell you what I learned about life from the first 3 clients I had in my first year of law practice. I was an appellate court clerk in the 11th Circuit in Georgia in 1983 and 84. I passed the Virginia bar exam in October of 1984. And I'm going to tell you what I learned from October of 1984 through October of 1985. Just my first 3 clients, lessons about life that I have continued to draw on for the rest of my life. My first client. There was a local organization in Richmond called Housing Opportunities Made Equal that turns 50 tomorrow. And it's a fair housing advocacy organization to try to help make sure people could get housing and not be turned away because of the color of their skin or their religion or their gender or if they had kids. And also this group tries to help people find affordable housing. They were looking for attorneys to be willing to take cases that were not going to be cases where you could be significantly compensated, where somebody had been treated unfairly. My first client, I had started practicing in October of 1984, and when you're at a firm, I was the 12th lawyer at this firm in Richmond. If a charity case comes in, they will say, yeah, let's see, who is the newest person here? And I was just absolutely brand new. And this client, her name was Lorraine. Lorraine was almost exactly my age and almost exactly my circumstance. We had both just moved to Richmond. We had both just gotten sort of our first jobs after schooling was done. And we had both just completed a search for an apartment. I looked for an apartment with my wife, excited to be starting our new life together in Richmond. I'm from Kansas City, so this was all new to me. And my experience was a real positive one. This was Lorraine's experience. She was staying with a friend, and at her job, she was looking at one ads about places to live, and she saw an apartment for rent that she knew the neighborhood and liked it. And so she picked up the phone and she called the landlord and said, hey, is this apartment still open? Absolutely. Can I come by at lunch to see it? Absolutely. An hour and a half later, she showed up and the landlord opened the door and looked at her face and said, oh, I'm sorry, the apartment's been rented. Well, Lorraine did not believe that to be the case. She just talked to her an hour before. So she went back to the office and she asked a colleague, hey, call this landlord and say you've seen the one ad and is the apartment available? And the colleague called and the landlord said, yeah, it's available, come on by. And she knew at that moment that she had been turned away because of the color of her skin. Now, this was an open and shut case. So it was the first lawsuit I drafted in federal court under the Federal Fair Housing Act. I had the witness. We filed it as soon as the lawyer on the other side deposed my witness. It's like, this case is over, we settled it. What did I learn? What did I learn? I learned how privileged that I was. And this is a lesson that really has stuck with me. This is not a law lesson, this is a life lesson. Here was what I learned. I had just had a very pivotal experience that all of us have, looking for a place to live. And I had been treated very fairly in that. And because of that, the next time I went to look for a place to live, when my wife and I bought our first house, I went into it with a feeling of excitement and, wow, this is going to be great, and I'm going to be treated fine. And I was. While we got a good settlement for Lorraine, her experience was different. Her experience was, wow, I got treated badly. And I got treated badly because of something I can't change about myself, the color of my skin. And I wonder, the next time I look for a house, or the next time I look for an apartment, am I going to get treated that way? And so the fact that we were so similar in some ways, but what had been a positive experience for me that left me feeling kind of confident and upbeat about the future had been a negative experience for her that was going to make her carry some uncertainty and doubt into the future. That taught me a lot about how privileged it is to not have to wander around wondering, is somebody going to treat me differently because of something about myself that I can't change? Now, in my life, I will say, I've had some people who haven't treated me well, but it's only been for one of two reasons. Either I was doing something stupid and deserved to be treated badly, or the other person was a jerk. Those are the only two reasons. I've never been treated badly because of some fact about myself from birth that I couldn't change. So that was the first powerful life lesson I learned from my very first client. The difference kind of between privilege and prejudice, and putting myself in somebody else's shoes a little bit, which is a really good thing to do with clients, for example, trying to put yourself in their shoes. My second client was a woman named Diane, and this was very similar to the first. The hard luck case that comes to my office and the managing partner says, go to the most junior person. Here's the lesson I learned from Diane. The issue that comes to you may not really be the problem. The issue that comes to you may not really be the problem. And again, I think of this more as a life lesson even than a law lesson. You got to dig sometimes to know what the real problem is. Here was Diane's case. Diane was a mentally disabled young woman, but who was making things work. She was working, and she was doing good stuff, and she had just gotten married. She was maybe in her mid-20s, and the guy that she married was in his mid-20s, and he also had some disability issues. Diane had a guardian, and the guardian sued to annul the marriage on the ground that neither Diane or her husband had the mental capacity to get married. And so this was obviously a case that would tug your heartstrings, and so I said, sure, okay, I'll work on the case. As I worked on the case for Diane, we were able to get the annulment suit dismissed, but the more I dug into it, the more I realized, wait a minute, this is much more than an annulment case. It turned out that Diane's guardian had been cashing her Social Security disability checks and keeping the money for herself rather than giving them to Diane. And what really threatened her about the marriage was the Social Security disability checks were now going to stop going to her because she was no longer a guardian since Diane was married. And over the course of the case, we discovered this, and I turned this into the U.S. Attorney's Office in Richmond. And the guardian ended up getting criminally prosecuted for stealing tens of thousands of dollars over many, many years from this person who she was supposed to be the guardian for. And so again, that was a case where the case that came to me was not really what the problem was. And I think you're going to see this in your law practice a lot. Somebody will come and they'll tell you the side of the story and what it is that the problem is, but when you dig into it, there's often many more layers to it. And the same way you'll find that in law practice, I have found that lesson to be really, really valuable in life over and over again. Don't just take at face value or at a superficial level what the problem is. Dig deeper and you might find out it's something much different or much bigger than that. The last of my three first-year clients was a guy named Richard Whitley, and he was on death row in Virginia. So I have for life been opposed to the death penalty. And I knew when I moved to Virginia in 1984, Virginia and Texas were the two states that used the death penalty the most. And so I let lawyers know, hey, look, I'm brand new. I've studied this a little bit in law school. If there's somebody on death row who doesn't have an attorney and needs help, I would be willing to help someone out. I don't want to do the case myself because I'm so brand new. I would be willing to help someone out. Before I had even been practicing for a year, I got a call one day and it said, Richard Whitley is on death row and he has an argument in the Virginia Supreme Court in 10 days. His lawyer just moved out of state without telling him. Will you argue the case? And I said, well, I'll help somebody, find somebody else to do it, and let me help them write the brief, and, you know, I'll sit at the table with them. But I mean, I've been a lawyer less than a year. Okay, well, we'll try. Well, then I got to call back 5 days later. We called everybody we know. We can't find anybody. As some of you are doing criminal procedure know, you have a right to court-appointed counsel for a trial and appeal. But when you get into the habeas corpus phase, state habeas corpus or federal, you don't have a right to counsel. So it really depends on finding a volunteer who will represent you. And I said, well, okay, I can't have his case before the Virginia Supreme Court and not have somebody argue it. So I said, I'll do it. And I could look at the case and know this is a time-buying case. This is not a case where we're going to be able to win. But nobody should be, you know, up in front of a court on a death penalty case without a lawyer. So I took this case and I argued the case in the Supreme Court. We lost. And then I filed a federal habeas corpus petition on his behalf in the federal courts. And that took about a year to work through. We lost in federal court. And I was honest when I went to death row, which at that point was down in Mecklenburg. When I met with him for the first time, you know, I was really scared. I was like 27 or 28, and they put you in a room with your client, and they lock the door, and it's like, oh, and the first thing they ask you when they bring a client in to see a lawyer, and nobody told me to ask you this, is, hey, lawyer, you want us to take the handcuffs off? Well, there's only one answer, which is your client, so the answer is yes, but I got to tell you, I didn't want to say yes. But anyway, I was a good actor. I said, sure, yeah, no, of course, of course. But I told them this is going to be a very hard case to win. And when we went through the habeas case and, you know, district court, Fourth Circuit, Supreme Court, and we lost it, didn't get cert in the Supreme Court, at that point, the outcome was clear. Now, I'll tell you this about my client. He'd done a lot of really bad things. This was a horrible crime. But long before he did his first bad thing, he had become an expert at this, an expert at being abandoned. An expert at being abandoned by family, by systems, by schools. He was an expert at being abandoned long before he started to do a lot of really horrible things. And he had developed, and you will see this in people, he had developed a little bit of a trait like, I'm going to reject you before you abandon me. So he tended to push off. And so when that case finished and he said, hey, what chances do we have? I said, look, I don't think we have much chance. I mean, there's other things I can file, but I'll be honest with you, we don't have much chance. He said, great, let's not do it. Just don't come back. We're not, you know, we don't need to do it anymore. And I was sort of wise to him about this. And I said, look, I'm not going to lie to you and say, you know, we're going to win this case. I don't think we're going to win this case. But if you'll let me do what I know how to do, because I got some other tricks up my sleeve. If you let me do what I know how to do, you can have more time. You have a sister that you've been estranged from for 40 or 50 years. You know, maybe you can use this time to rebuild that relationship with her. I'm not going to abandon you if you will not quit. And I don't think anybody had ever said something like that. I'm not going to abandon you if you won't quit. And so I did. I came up with some novel cases that I filed. Federal habeas corpus round 2 and a novel petition in the Virginia Supreme Court, and none of them succeeded. But it took about another 6 or 7 months. And during this time, he did find this sister that he had long been, she had left the abusive household to get out, this older sister. And it always kind of felt guilty about like, well, but if I had taken my brother with me, would he have had a different life? And so it was important to both of them that they reconnect. So what I learned from that one is in law with a client who's going through a tough circumstance, whatever it is, or in life, it sounds so simple, but just, hey, I won't abandon you. I'm here, good or bad. I'm going to be here, good or bad. I had this with Richard. We had his last meal together before he went into the death chamber then in Spring Street Penitentiary, which is now closed to Richard, the electric unit. Walked him right through that door after we had our last meal together. I didn't abandon him. You'll have that opportunity as a lawyer, and you'll have that opportunity in life where there may be circumstances that suggest, hey, I should back away from this. And you don't have to get overly wrapped up in everybody's situation, but you can make a choice to stick with somebody come hell or high water. Those three lessons, there but for the grace of God go I, the difference between privilege and prejudice. The initial superficial issue isn't always the real issue. And the simple virtue of just sticking with somebody, I've drawn on every day since. Last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to open it up and take questions, advice, ideas about anything, including anything that the Senate's working on, is how has being a lawyer helped me in public life? Because I've been now in elected office for 28 years. In fact, the 28th anniversary of my first election is on May 6th to the Richmond City Council. And I will say there are two really distinct areas where being in a lawyer have really helped me in elected office. The first one is wins and losses. I mean, I had a second client that I represented on death row, and in that case, he couldn't walk into the chamber on his own, and he asked me to walk in with him. And it was a very similar case, except it was even weirder in some ways. We won the case twice in the U.S. Supreme Court, but then it would come back and the sentence would be reimposed. So at some points along the way, we thought we might be successful, but at the end of the day, we weren't. And after we had our last meal together, and I wasn't exactly looking forward to walking into the chamber, he said, hey, I can't walk in there by myself. I'm walking in with you. I'm walking in with you. But I also, as Dale said, I won the biggest civil rights jury verdict in the history of the United States, $100 million jury verdict against Nationwide Insurance for redlining minority neighborhoods in issuing homeowners insurance. So there's no bigger loss than losing a capital case. And I don't know that there was a bigger win for a civil rights lawyer than, changing the way homeowners insurance is written in the United States. That ended up being the outcome of the case that we did. But wins and losses and realizing, hey, those are outside. They don't necessarily have to turn you into super depressed inside or super egotistical inside. And getting through some really big wins and some really big losses and learning how to handle both, that's really helped. That's really helped. I have been on 10 ballots as an elected official, and I have won the popular vote in all 10. And I have won the Virginia vote in all 10. But I'm not undefeated. I call myself an electoral college dropout. So I'm 9-1. Not being on a national ticket was a big deal. Losing in November 2016, that was a big loss. But I think having had the lawyer's experience of the big wins and the big losses, I kind of have learned how to handle it. And that has really been helpful. I don't get too high after a victory. I just turn to the next thing, and I don't get too low after a defeat. I just turn to the next thing. And there's plenty of them, not just in elections, bills that I want to get passed. I just threw my heart and soul into an effort to do voting rights legislation in the Senate. We fell 1 vote short. We fell 2 votes short. We just needed 2 more votes, and we couldn't get there. And, how depressing. But I've been here before. I'll wake up tomorrow. I'll be focused on something else. The second area where being a lawyer can really help you, where it helps me in public life, but it's going to help you whatever you do. The good lawyers learn how to depersonalize conflict. I mean, if you're a lawyer in a trial, you're going hard against the other side. If you're a lawyer in a business negotiation, you're doing everything for your client, and the other side's doing everything for their client. There is almost nothing in law that doesn't have some element of conflict or competition in the middle of it. But if you personalize that and then you treat the other lawyer badly because he beat you in a motion or because she, didn't respond to discovery in time or something, then they'll treat you badly, and then the whole thing will devolve. You need, as a lawyer, to be able to call the person on the other side and say, hey, I know I owe you a response to this on Friday, but my kid has a graduation, and I'm going to be away this weekend. Can I do it next Tuesday instead? You want to be able to do that. And the only way you can do that is if the lawyer on the other side knows if they called, you would do that for them. And so good lawyers really learn how to, okay, our clients may be at odds, but we're not going to treat each other like jerks. We're going to try to cooperate. And we're even going to try to educate our clients a little bit. Hey, I know you feel this way, but let me tell you how the other side sees it. listen to their arguments, stand in their shoes for a minute, and then you'll see it's seldom the case that it's 100% right and 0% right in any dispute. There's usually some important perspectives on both sides. Well, in politics, this is so bad. When I was in my first position, city council, I had colleagues who hadn't been lawyers, who hadn't done what I did, and they really had a hard time. If there was a critical vote on the floor and they really cared about it and they lost, they would kind of hold it against their colleagues who didn't vote with them. But the next day, there was something else that they wanted. And the day after that, there was something else they wanted. And if you personalize conflict, oh, I can't work with you now because you voted against me. Well, wait, there's plenty more things that we can work on together. And in the Senate, that turns out to be very valuable. My voting rights thing, some dear friends of mine wouldn't come along with me on it, but I have to let that go. Okay, you come from a different state, you're entitled to see it the way you do. If I want you to respect the 2 senators Virginia sends, I got to respect the 2 senators the 49 other states send. I can't hold it personally. Let's work on the next issue together. So that issue, to be able to depersonalize conflict and engage in conflict, but do it in a civil way, is something that all of you in practicing law will have to do day in and day out, and the good lawyers know how to do it and do it very well. Thank you for the opportunity to come and just share a little bit about my own professional life. Being a lawyer was such a good chapter in my life, and I continue to draw on it, as you can tell, in my public service chapter. And with that, I'd love to open it up and, again, take questions about anything or advice or suggestions. I'll steal a good idea from anyone. So, and the only thing I'd ask is if you want to ask a question, just tell me your name and what year you are here at Appalachian as you do. Please, right here.
I'm Brandy Hurley, I'm 3L, and I'm vice chair of the Russell County Democratic Society, so thank you for coming there.
Absolutely. And is it Randy or Brandy?
Brandy.
Brandy, okay.
So you were talking a little bit about your career in law and your career in politics, but do you think lawyers make good politicians?
The answer is yes. Now, it used to be, if you went to the Virginia General Assembly 50 years ago and you looked at what people's professions were, I would say, 2/3 of them would have been lawyers. It's gotten a lot less. There are ethical rules, for example, that say if you're in a legislative body, like, for example, when I got into the city council, suddenly my law firm couldn't do any legal business for the city. Okay, well, we were conflicted out. And so more and more lawyers and law firms decide it's not a good idea to be in one of the elected bodies because of conflict of interest rules, et cetera. So the numbers have gone down. And it's actually good to have, when I was lieutenant governor and governor, one of my favorite legislators was a guy who was a tree surgeon. And Jim Schuler, a veterinarian from Blacksburg. And it's good to have a legislative body that's got, housewives and small business owners and former police officers and veterans and lawyers and teachers. And, a diversity of backgrounds is helpful. But I do think having lawyers helps. We get real, what do you do here? You read statutes and you read cases and you learn to make distinctions, and the language and precision really matters. That's extremely important in politics. Drafting legislation, how many times do we work on something and then we'll catch a little glitch or an error, right before it's done? And it's usually the lawyers who do that. We don't catch them all, but that helps. Secondly, this depersonalizing conflict thing. Lawyers are much better at that than most people are, just because we do it all the time. And then the last one is, and other professions can have this too, the whole notion of life has its ups and downs, you have wins and losses, you got to kind of roll with the punches, not get too high, not get too low. So yeah, I think it's a really good professional foundation for being in elected office.
Thank you.
And others.
I've
Yeah,
got one for you.
please. Yeah,
Okay.
please.
So you've already met me. My name is Jacob Snuffer. I'm a 2L here from West Virginia. And so I am in an environmental law class that is taught by Buzz Belville. And in that class, we have learned about the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, all of the environmental statutes that have been passed down. And in each and every one of those, kind of the theme of the class that I have got is that it flip-flops between administrations. So, the Republicans, they have one way of doing things,
Right.
and then as soon as Joe Biden comes in, he's going to do it a different way, and then as soon as he gets out, whenever that is, it's going to be a different way. And there are ambiguous, there's a lot of ambiguous language in each of those statutes.
Right.
And it keeps lawyers in business,
Yeah.
right? But at the same time, I feel like Congress is in the best position to fix those ambiguities. And so can you give kind of like any reasoning that you think as to why Congress hasn't addressed these ambiguities, and if there is any way of moving forward so that, you know, businesses
Yeah.
and environmentalists can really get some answers that are solid instead of wavering?
What a great question. And is it Shelley?
Yeah.
So we're talking about Buzz, but also Shelley teaches administrative law. And this is kind of an administrative law question too. So Congress probably, you know, maybe beginning, I don't know, might have begun in the 50s, but it's accelerated. Congress will pass laws and defer a lot of it to regulation. So instead of being like super precise, okay, we'll do this, but then the EPA writes regulations or HHS writes regulations. And we do a lot of that. And frankly, some of it is wise because regulations can be written over time that take into account the realities of the time. Some of it is a little bit of a default of responsibility or sometimes a conflict of avoidance mechanism. We can agree on the big principles. Okay, we agree on that. Like the Clean Water Act, let's use that as an example. It's 50 years old this year. It was passed during the Nixon administration. This was a Republican bill, but it might have been, okay, there's a big bipartisan agreement. We need to do something to keep the nation's waters clean. But when you get into the details, we might not have been able to find easy agreement on the details. So we will put that into regulators' hands, knowing that a Republican administration might have one idea about regulation, Democratic administration might have another idea about regulation, but that's okay too. If the nation picks a Democratic president can regulate, and the nation says, oh, well, we want a Republican president now, Republican president can regulate. So that's not all bad, but the point, the kind of the finishing point of your question is, what about more certainty? It is hard for businesses, environmental groups, everyday citizens in whatever area, but we'll use the environmental laws to sort of adjust around, okay, is this the reality? How quickly is it going to change? I want to make an investment decision. Should I make it? To compound this, we often do in the energy space, we often do tax credits, production tax credits, investment tax credits, but instead of making them permanent, we say, okay, it's for 5 years, but then it would sunset. And so then the businesses are trying to decide, okay, I want to make this investment. Will they just renew it at the end of 5 years, or will they really let it sunset, in which case I might be in a jam? So I think that it's a fair critique. There's a downside of the way we do it. The upside is, you know, being president, I think, carries a mandate with it, and that mandate would include a kind of a regulatory philosophy. So flexibility to circumstances versus certainty, where's the right, you know, balance point? Both have their virtues. Where's the right balance point? But really good question. Clean Water Act is a good example. I mean, I hope you're doing a 50th anniversary Clean Water Act stuff, because that's an act that has a lot of critics, like this Waters of the United States. I mean, are you kidding me? You can't call this little tiny brook navigable water that should be regulated by the federal government. By the same token, before the Clean Water Act, Richmond, the James River was wasted, and the Clean Water Act has helped us clean up the James in Richmond. Your dean came from Liberty, same thing in Lynchburg, and now, you know, you have recreation on the river and bald eagles and herons, and you can fish again, and the Clean Water Act has kind of been responsible for that. So again, there's the good, the bad, the ugly. So I think I saw a question in the background.
The iteration of the Supreme Court as it is seems to have demonstrated some appetite for limiting regulatory powers. So it's sort of this question under a major questions or non-delegation.
Yeah.
Is the court's willingness to shut down regulatory flexibility on your radar as you're drafting laws today?
Did everybody hear the question? So this is a really good question. And I will say, when I practiced law, I used to follow the Supreme Court so closely about what they were doing, and I'm a little bit back from it now. I actually see two somewhat conflicting tendencies in the Supreme Court now on this question. You're right, there is some greater willingness on the Supreme Court to not accord deference to regulatory action and maybe be a little more forward-leaning in knocking down regulations. By the same token, there's been an increase in the number of Supreme Court justices, and Justice Kavanaugh would be the chief among these, but there are others too, who kind of have this unitary executive theory that basically says, okay, Article 3 branches are all co-equal, but the executive branch, the second branch, really should be given more deference even than Congress. So you kind of see a willingness to be forward-leaning and striking down administrative regulations, but you also see a different part of the court that is, I think, more prone to deferring to executive power than to legislative power. And these are sort of there will be some collisions. And some of the members of the court actually are kind of in both of these camps. So I have a hard time predicting where that issue is going to come out or in a set of cases. And it may not come out completely consistently. You might see certain kinds of regs where they'll lean for and knock them down, and others where they'll uphold them. But it is on our mind as we're drafting legislation. If we can get consensus to try to make it more specific, to not leave it ambiguous and subject to court challenge, we try to. But sometimes we can't get consensus, and so we get consensus on the big picture and leave the details to the regulators. Yeah, directly ahead.
Yes, sir. First of all, thanks for coming out here, Senator. I know we're at the far end of the state and probably not on many people's radars, so it's always great to have big names come out here. My question for you is about your push for the Virginia plan to combat gun violence. Yep. So I'm from Texas. I'm a 3L. My name is cjgrisham.
Yep.
And I don't understand how a single point of what you're advocating for is going to do anything to solve gun violence, because you're focusing on the how and not the why. And as long as we are going after tools and not the people using those tools, why should a law-abiding gun owner be limited to one gun per month? Why should I have to ask permission from the government to sell to my neighbor? My children have been shooting since they were 8 years old. Why should I be criminalized for allowing them to have access to a gun? Can you explain kind of exactly how that plan is going to actually reduce gun violence, considering states like California and New York that have already implemented that stuff?
Yes, I'm glad to. So CJ has asked about a bill that Senator Warner and I have introduced called the Virginia Plan, and it's based upon Virginia rules that have been put in place in the last couple of years to deal with gun violence. And there's a number of pieces that the Virginia General Assembly have put in place. Let me address a couple of them, because I actually think they will be effective and they have been effective. Now, I'm going to start off by saying, in the same ways that you shared your own experience with your kids, I have experience too in scar tissue. So I was the mayor of Richmond when the city was the second highest homicide rate in the United States. And our top priority for years was, can we bring down homicides and aggravated assaults committed by guns in Richmond? And we did. We dropped them dramatically by doing some of the things that are in the Virginia plan. And then the second thing that's even more part of my emotional makeup, and it's very fresh, because just 3 days ago, we celebrated the 15th anniversary of the shooting at Virginia Tech. I was governor. It was the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States at the time. Sadly, it's no longer the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States. And this campus has been scarred by gun violence. I was governor when the shooting happened at this campus. Sung-Lee Cho, who was the deranged individual who killed 32 people at Virginia Tech before taking his own life, was barred by federal law from having a weapon because he had been adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous. And under federal law, such an adjudication should stop you from getting a weapon. But weaknesses in the background check system for the transfer of weapons enabled him to get a weapon illegally, 2 semi-automatic pistols that he used to kill 32 people. It was weaknesses in our gun laws. Now, it was also mental health. The sad tragedy of Sung-Lee Cho is that his mental health needs were sort of understood at high school, and they could kind of wrap services around him and he could be successful. But then he went to a college campus where nobody knew that history and he was sort of increasingly isolated. So it's not just guns. I mean, there's tons of mental health components to this. But there was a problem with the gun laws in this, which is we have a federal law that says you can't have a weapon, but we don't have a background check system that keeps some we choke from getting a weapon. So here is my thought about the Virginia plan. Comprehensive background checks work. They work. States that did not have comprehensive background checks, but that have gone to comprehensive background checks, you cannot sell or transfer a weapon to anyone unless you can confirm that they're not barred by law from having a weapon. States that have those laws, and especially ones that have gone from no comprehensive to comprehensive, have found that it reduces gun violence. And the background check system, even though it's incomplete, actually does work to keep people from getting weapons who shouldn't. It's just that there's so many loopholes that those loopholes allow people to end run and get weapons and then use them to commit harm. So part of the Virginia plan is to take the current federal law and have comprehensive background checks so that people can't get weapons who are barred from having them. Similarly, one handgun a month. Virginia had one handgun a month from the Wilder administration. It probably would have been in maybe 1991 or so, until my successor as governor with the legislature terminated one handgun a month. And you can look at the Virginia stats, but also Virginia, when we were not one handgun a month, were basically sort of the arms producer for weapons used in Maryland, weapons used in New York City. People would come and buy unlimited weapons in Virginia and then sell them at a big profit. And then those weapons would be used to commit crimes in all kinds of other places. When Virginia had one handgun a month, you can look at pre, you can look at during, you can look at post. The one handgun a month helped reduce crime. Now, I get it that there's an argument about the Second Amendment is the only amendment that uses the phrase well-regulated. And as you know, because everybody takes common law here, there's no constitutional principle that's absolute. Freedom of speech, well, Lloyd, that doesn't mean libel or slander. Every constitutional principle usually has some limiting notion to it. And only one of the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, even refers to regulation within it, well-regulated. And the Supreme Court has said, and I agree with them, the Second Amendment does give an individual right to firearm ownership. It's not just about militias, it's about individuals, and I agree with that. But the Supreme Court has also said, like other amendments in the Bill of Rights, it's not absolute. And so the question of what is a reasonable regulation, obviously, is what most of the cases now deal with. And some courts say, you know, a ban on high-capacity magazines, for example, which some states are doing, that's too much, or bans on certain kinds of weapons are too much. There's a lot of churn in the circuits, and I think you're going to see a lot of Supreme Court, you know, cases in the future about, well, is this regulation too hot, too cold, or just right? But I believe, from my experience, that at least two of the components, the universal background check and one handgun a month, are both reasonable and would dramatically reduce crime. But I recognize that those are, you know, debatable propositions. So
Thank you.
how about on either of the flanks? So I've called on everybody from the center section so far, please.
My name is AJ.
Hey, AJ.
So I have a question about decriminalizing marijuana.
Yeah.
So I currently reside in the state of Colorado.
Yeah.
And my partner, especially, so we've been having discussions about the decriminalization of marijuana, and I've seen various states decriminalize it. Is there a plan at a federal level to decriminalize it? And then is there also a plan for various states who have decriminalized it for those who have been prosecuted? And are currently serving jail time or prison time for, like, you know,
Expungement.
right, crimes related to marijuana. Is there a plan for them once it is decriminalized? To kind of get them back on the right track, redirect them, kind of compensation.
So on this side of the room, everybody hear AJ's questions about marijuana decriminalization at the federal level. So talk about a quirky setup right now if you look at kind of federalism. So you have states, and Colorado was at the front end, but other states too, who have not only decriminalized marijuana, but set up a state licensing and taxation scheme, kind of like we would have, ABC stores regulated by the state. Some states have done that. Some states have not decriminalized, but allowed medical marijuana. And then some states have not decriminalized at all. And then you have the federal government where it is still a federal criminal offense. And so this mismatch between the federal law and the state law creates all kind of weird consequences. In Colorado, folks who are lawfully under state law having shops that sell marijuana often can't take the cash from their business and put it in a federally chartered bank because it would violate federal law. The VA hospital in Salem, Virginia has now moved to decriminalization. Let's go back 2 years ago. If a doctor treating a vet for anxiety or maybe a pain management thing, and I don't want to prescribe an opioid because we know how dangerous and addictive those can be, maybe the doctor decides, look, I wonder if marijuana might be an anxiety producer or even help you with chronic pain management. Even though now, today, that would be legal under state law, it's still not legal under federal law, so the doctor at the VA can't suggest that as a treatment. So you have all these quirks because of the federalism system we have. Here's what's up in Congress right now. There is a bill to decriminalize, and I'm a co-sponsor of it. And the bill would not only decriminalize, but it would, folks who are in any state or federal institution for marijuana use would be free, and their records would be expunged. So that's right now. There's a separate bill to try to clarify this banking issue, to try to allow, at least in states that have decriminalized marijuana, the businesses can use the banking sector for that. And then there's other bills, because of the way marijuana was scheduled as an illegal substance, it also meant that there couldn't be research done about are there any beneficial effects of marijuana. So for example, well, let's compare chronic pain management, opioids, other pain management strategies, use of marijuana. Let's look at the good and the bad. I mean, well, we couldn't do research on that for a very long time. Now we're able to do it finally, and we're starting to be able to do something, trying to play catch up. I will say the one area where I still am really mixed is the commercialization of marijuana. Should states regulate and tax it, or should we just decriminalize? It's not going to be a criminal offense if you use marijuana. I'm somewhat conflicted about that because I think if it's regulated and taxed, then states have an interest. Like, it would be nice if people use more marijuana because it would help with tax revenues. And I'm not sure that's what we want to do, but that is what we do with alcohol. And I don't know that there's really a meaningful distinction. Or at least I could argue that there's a distinction, but I hear really good arguments to the counter. So I haven't completely wrapped my head around that yet. But I think you will see this. I have a medical marijuana decriminalization bill with Morgan Griffith, a member of Congress from here. And Morgan was, basically not a fan of this legislation at all until he was a lawyer too before he got into Congress. And, he would see people dealing with chronic pain issues or glaucoma or things like that, where marijuana was the most effective treatment for their condition. And he was like, do we really want to call this person a criminal when they're really using this effectively for medical treatment? So it's an area in development, but the good news is the move toward decriminalization is not partisan. It's bipartisan and picking up more bipartisan support. So I think it's just a matter of time. Can I come over to this side of the room and see if there's anyone on this side? Okay, I'm going to move back into somewhere else, unless, and then, okay, I'm going to go to the dean. Yes.
If there's another student who has a question.
Let's see.
Is talk about the court and the confirmation of a new justice.
Yes.
And what that means to the court. Can you talk about the significance of that nomination and confirmation, and then expand that into a conversation about the conversations about adding additional justices to the court and the risks and benefits that may or that come with that.
Thank you for asking that, Dean. So I found the confirmation, the vote that day for Judge Jackson. She will not be justice until Justice Breyer steps down. So she's still a DC Circuit Judge. But I found that to be very moving. And I'll tell you what I found most moving about it. And as I'm saying this, I'm sort of looking around to see who your students are. I'm a little embarrassed at this thing that I'm going to say. When I started in law school in the fall of 1979, the only woman justice at the Supreme Court was a white marble statue on the steps outside the court. 9 men. There was racial diversity, Justice Marshall, but it was only men. And the thing I feel embarrassed about, that didn't seem unusual to me. It was not like, I can't believe the Supreme Court doesn't have any women on it. I didn't start into law school and look at the Supreme Court and find anything unusual about it. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that in retrospect. Well, with the confirmation vote for Judge Jackson, in the life of this lawyer, so from, starting law school in 1979 to now, 43 years later, we've gone from 0 out of 9 women on the court to 4 out of 9. What a powerful thing. And I'm looking at the composition of your law school here, and if the people in the class are any indication, I guess it's probably 50-50 or so, right? So that's a really exciting thing. And, for as much as I tend to focus on things where, we're not good enough at this, we need to get better, and that's a good trait. Thomas Edison said discontent is the first sign of progress. If you're content about everything, you don't push to make things better. So you got to have some agitation inside about this could be better, this could be better. So I'm usually focused on what could be better, but you do need to step back and say, but hey, we can make and are making and have made progress. And this was one instance of that. I met with Judge Jackson. I had voted for her twice before for district court and court of appeals, but I don't meet with judges unless they're Virginia judges, except for the Supreme Court nominees. I always meet with them. And I'm very impressed with her. And I think, I'll tell you something I really like about her. First, as a public defender, the court already has people on it who are prosecutors, and that's a really important expertise. The court needs people who are prosecutors. Sonia Sotomayor prosecuted cases as a DA in state court, and Samuel Alito prosecuted cases, including some really major, like mob violence cases, as U.S. attorney. You got to have that on the court. But we hadn't had a public defender on the court, so I think that's a helpful thing. The other thing is she was a trial judge, and I often think this is my bias as a trial lawyer, I often think that we don't have the trial court expertise that we need sometimes on the Supreme Court, and we lose by that because an awful lot of the Supreme Court docket is giving instructions to trial judges, evidentiary rulings, whether to strike a juror over a Batson challenge, how to do sentencing if you're a trial court judge in the federal system, discovery disputes. So much of the Supreme Court's docket is telling trial judges, okay, here's the way to do it. If the justices writing those opinions, or haven't done trials or been trial judges, then they're not going to be as strong in giving really clear advice. So I think that's something that a Judge Jackson will do well. What do I think about the expansion of the court? I got to admit, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. And maybe I'm a fuddy-duddy. I'm 64 years old. And, I hear people make the argument, and I bet you've argued this around here, the Constitution doesn't set the size of the court, except you could have a one-member Supreme Court. The only one that said is the Chief Justice. The size of the court has fluctuated. It's been as small as 6, I think. It might have been as high as 10 or 11, at 13 at one point. I'll tell you this, if there was no Constitution and we were now a constitutional convention and we were going to debate the size of the court, the idea that I would put on the table is I would put on the table one justice from each judicial circuit and then a Chief Justice. The reason I would do that is I think over time, the Supreme Court has kind of been captured by the Acela corridor. People who they've been educated and had their law practice pretty much between DC and Boston. And I think that even though I was not, I'm not a huge fan of President Trump, even of his Supreme Court nominees, I'm going to give him credit for this. I liked putting somebody on from the 7th Circuit. I liked putting somebody on from the 10th Circuit. The Trump team was thinking about geographic diversity, and I think that makes sense because if you're dealing with an issue, we'll pick a natural resource issue, public lands issue, and you have justices who are all kind of East Coast justices, public lands issues are very, very different in the West than they are in the East, or you have a water rights issue. Very, very different in the West and the East. So if you don't have a court with geographic diversity, you can miss really important nuances about how things work in real life. So if we were starting from scratch, I might advocate for a court, one from each circuit. And so if somebody, retires who's from the 7th Circuit, you don't put somebody on from DC, you find somebody who has practiced and had their professional life in that area. But right now, the debate is so heavily politicized that there's really no movement you could make where the primary focus would be, okay, well, you're just trying to game it for your own side. And I worry a lot about the legitimacy of the court now. I worry about ethics of the court. I worry that the fact that the Supreme Court justices are not really subject to the same ethics rules that district court judges and appellate court judges are. So I have a lot of worries about the institutional legitimacy of the court. I think Chief Justice Roberts says too. And I think anything that Congress would get into about the size of the court would make that politicization worse, not better. Please.
So I'll ask you a question about coal, since you're in this area.
Yeah, sure.
There's at least $18 trillion owned by one single company in Buchanan County worth of proven coal reserves.
Yeah.
So it's safe to say coal mining will continue in the future.
Yeah.
Hurley community just had a devastating flood, and FEMA regulations didn't help them recover. So I wondered, in your opinion, would it be better to come in from an MSHA standpoint and prevent those types of things from happening because our water table is being covered by coal mining? Or is there anything being done to help on the back end for the people who do face that kind of issue?
And tell me your name again.
Brandy Hurley.
Brandy. And I'm going to be in Hurley later this morning because Congressman Griffith and Senator Warner and I had to fight for that FEMA emergency designation, and we got it for the county to repair infrastructure, but we didn't get it for families and businesses that lost it. We had to fight a second round, and it eventually came through so that people can be helped. So I am not aware of how the regulation issue impacted the flooding situation, but the folks I'm going to be with at my next meeting today, I bet they will tell me. So I'm going to ask them since you asked it to me. Look, we do need to deal with climate change. We do have to make energy cleaner tomorrow than today. We can't do it by just throwing a switch and saying we're going to turn completely a different direction. It's an incremental thing. It would be cleaner tomorrow than today, and then cleaner the day after than tomorrow. And we're going to continue to use coal and natural gas. I was the governor and was very involved in the permitting of the facility at Wise, Virginia City plant at Wise. And not everybody liked the fact that I was involved in that, but my attitude was, let's build the state-of-the-art cleanest plant that we can, that uses, that produces less NOx, less SOx, less mercury, that uses less water, that can burn with waste coal that is often sitting in piles, creating environmental hazards in communities here and there, and that has a capacity, if we ever figure anything out on CCS, that would have a capacity to do CCS containment and carbon sequestration on site there. And I continue to believe we just got to look for ways to make our energy portfolio cleaner. So make the coal portion cleaner, make the natural gas portion cleaner with methane regs, and do more on wind and solar. We got to do it all. And hopefully we could do even on some of the wind and solar side, let's do some of the manufacturing of these components. Virginia is going to be the center of offshore wind in the United States. Let's do manufacturing in manufacturing communities, including Southwest Virginia. So I need to look at the reg issue that I don't really understand, and maybe I can ask folks about it after. But I'd say floor it on our low and no carbon energy investments and figure out ways to always make coal and natural gas a little bit cleaner every day. But look, you see what's happening. Europe has phased out coal and nuclear, Germany. And so they need natural gas. And so Russia has them completely over a barrel. I guess that probably is a petroleum originated, truism. Russia has them over a barrel because of them phasing out of other forms of energy. So I think coal and natural gas are going to be the bridge into the green future. But we can make them cleaner too. We should be investing to do that.
Senator, I don't think
Yes.
you're out of time.
All right. Morgan, thank you. Dale, thank you. Dean, thank you. I really enjoyed being with you today.
Before you go,
I've never gotten a chocolate. Well, maybe that's rubber.
it's your problem. It's probably we all have them at this point.
Hey, great questions. I really appreciated the chance to be with you. And Dean, thanks for the invite.
Thank
It's
you
a
so
tap.
much
Thank you
for
guys.
taking the time to be with us. this
Absolutely.
morning.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out and spending your morning with us. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Guys,